Now, Labour is set to launch plans to tackle the small boat crisis today. Let's speak to Yvette Cooper now, the Shadow Home Secretary. Very good to see you this morning, Yvette Cooper. And, well, this is what we've all been waiting for, isn't it? This is Labour's plans to tackle the small boat crossings.
We're setting out a plan today for a new border security command to bring together the work of the National Crime Agency, the Border Force, MI5, police forces, and work with Europol and police forces right across Europe to go after the criminal gangs. They would have new counter-terror style powers and also new resources to be able to recruit many hundreds, up to 1,000 new investigators, cross-border police, because we have to go after the criminal gangs. They are undermining border security and putting lives at risk with these dangerous boat crossings, and that's why this action is so urgently needed.
Right, and that may work, but if the Rwanda plan is proving to work by the time, should you get into office, by the time of a general election, why would you scrap it if it's working?
Well, the thing about the Rwanda scheme is it's only likely to cover a few hundred people, and more people arrived in the last week than that. We've seen nearly 9,000 people arrive this year already on small boats, and yet they're only likely to send 300 people to Rwanda. The Rwanda scheme is a scheme just for 1% of asylum seekers. There's no plan for the 99%.
No, forgive
me. And it's
me.
Costing the taxpayer over £500 million. That is a huge sum of money for just a tiny number of people, and that's why we think that money should go into boosting our border security and going after the criminal gangs instead.
But the whole point of the Rwanda scheme is it might be costing 75 million a year, or whatever the figure is, but it's a deterrent. So that cost would go down year on year, wouldn't it? The whole point of it is it stops coming people here. It's not about them all coming over and then shipping them off.
Well, 1% of asylum seekers costing £500 million. That £500 million is only to send a few hundred people. That's not the cost of if they were doing something different. That is the cost of sending just 1%. And that's the problem. There is a reason that Home Office officials themselves have said there's no evidence of a deterrent because this is only applying for 1%. That means 99% of people arriving on small boats, in practice, under the way the government's doing this, actually are able to go into asylum accommodation, into asylum hotels, and stay there indefinitely because nothing is being done. There's no proper programme and there's nothing being done to tackle the criminal gangs. And we saw those awful scenes of people getting onto crowded boats. We saw that awful case of an 8-year-old girl being killed on these boats. The boat crossings are dangerous. They're undermining border security. They're putting lives at risk. You've got to go after the criminal gangs or they will just find more people to exploit. They will just organise more crossings, whatever it is, and however many checks the government writes to Rwanda.
And what about those that are already here, those who have already made it here illegally on a small boat? Can you confirm or can you rule out that you are not just going to declare an amnesty for those people and essentially wipe the slate clean?
We don't believe in amnesties. We think that's the wrong thing to do. Rules need to be enforced. Proper rules need to be enforced. The problem, what we've got at the moment, is the Conservatives, Rishi Sunak is effectively operating an amnesty for those 99% of people who are arriving because they're not having any decisions made on their cases. That means those who have not fled persecution, those who have no right to be here, are not being returned to their home country. In fact, returns for failed asylum cases have actually dropped by nearly a half since the Conservatives first came to power. So those rules aren't being enforced. That is a chaotic system. What you actually need to do is to properly clear the backlog, but we should be preventing the boat crossings in the first place. And that's why we want to set up this new border security command. And the reason that's important is we're basically learning from what we did on tackling terrorist networks, on the counter-terror work that took place after we had 9/11 and then the 7/7 attacks. Britain completely overhauled the way it dealt with counter-terrorism, bringing all of these agencies and forces together with a comprehensive single strategy to go after terrorists and and terror networks and extremists. We need to take the same approach now to our border security, because once again, it is putting lives at risk and undermining the security of the country.
Right, so you tackle the people behind this. That's understandable. You say no amnesty for those people who have come over here illegally. So what do you do to track these people down and get them out of the country?
So you have to have proper systems to go after those criminal gang networks. That means you need proper intelligence networks, you need proper policing and so on.
Forgive me, I'm not talking about the criminal gang members here, I'm talking about the migrants.
Sure. Well, we've now going to have to deal with the huge backlog that the Conservatives have now created, because what you have is we've now got around 100,000 people or more in the asylum system. They've arrived, they're now in the asylum system, they're in asylum accommodation, they're in asylum hotels. We're going to have to clear up that mess and that crisis of that backlog that's been created. So we do have a plan to end asylum hotel use and to make sure that decisions are swiftly taken. We would fast track decisions on safe countries, so you can fast track those decisions and have proper returns, and also make sure that the UK has always done its bit for those who have fled persecution. For example, Afghan interpreters who helped our armed forces. That's something that really all countries have to do their part on. But at the moment, no decisions are being taken, no rules are being enforced, and we're not seeing those returns taking place. And what we're instead seeing actually is some really shocking exploitation going on.
You're setting out your plans for tackling small boat crossings today. What about Labour's plans for legal migration? Net migration numbers at best part of 750,000 people. That's not sustainable, is it?
So we believe that net migration should come down. You're right that the level has, I think, trebled since the last election. And one of the things that has been behind that has been a really big increase in work visas. Now, look, obviously, the UK has always benefited from people coming from abroad to set up businesses or to provide international top talent. But they had to have this huge increase in work visas, we think, is the wrong approach. And that's why we've said we've got to have a proper plan to tackle the skills shortages that lie behind it. We did propose a series of additional further changes, for example, getting rid of what used to be this 20% discount for overseas workers that the Conservatives brought into the points-based immigration system. We thought that was the wrong approach. What we should be doing instead is getting rid of that. That was a sort of incentive to undercut and to have the overseas recruitment, when actually what we really need is to have a proper plan for training and skills here in the UK. And that's why we've set out plans about how we would do that, reforms to the apprenticeship levy and targeting the key areas where we've got shortages.
Can I just return to the sort of major plan, if you like? How closely would you have to work with the EU on this? And would they allow us to work more closely? I mean, in effect, it opens up the possibility of us working on other borders, doesn't it? And being involved in policing borders, around the Mediterranean, around the Balkans, where a lot of these people are coming from. It's more integration into the EU, isn't it?
Well, we're outside the EU and we're staying outside the EU, but we should be working with our neighbouring countries on issues around crime, security, those sorts of things. That to me feels like that's a no-brainer. Of course, we should be sharing information on criminals across borders. We're not currently doing that properly. That's one of the things that wasn't sorted out as part of the Brexit agreement. We think that should be sorted out. We should be getting fast information on people who might be wanted for crimes in other countries. We should know that as soon as they arrive at our border. We should know, for example, if somebody has already claimed asylum and been turned down, for example, in Germany or in another country, as soon as they arrive at our border, so that we can then fast track those cases as well. At the moment, we're not sharing that information. So we do want to see that new security cooperation agreement on things like criminal information and intelligence. That benefits everybody. It benefits European countries, it benefits the UK, and it keeps all of our communities safe.
Before we let you go, I did just want to ask you about your new colleague, Natalie Elphicke, who's obviously defected from the Conservatives to Labour. It's no accident, is it, that this speech today is going to be made in her seat in Dover. You're capitalising on her defection, aren't you? And how do you feel about standing next to your new colleague today?
We're right. I'm in Dover now speaking to you. We are in Natalie Elphicke's constituency. And I think it is significant that the Dover MP, who has really seen the consequences of the small boat crossings, who has been following this policy issue in some detail over many years, has concluded not just that there are huge problems with the government's Rwanda scheme, but also that our approach, that border security approach, going after the criminal gangs in this coordinated way, that is the right way forward. And I hope that other people who may not have voted Labour at the last election, may have voted for many different parties, will look at what Labour is proposing, not just around our border security, but also around the National Health Service, around getting our economy back on track, around support for families dealing with the cost of living crisis that has just had this shocking impact. After 14 years of the Conservatives, the chaos has got worse and worse and worse. So I hope that we can welcome more people like Natalie who will have changed their minds to the Labour Party. That's really important to us.